Do you find yourself having a hard time dealing with conflict?
On today's show, we're going to be talking about how to deal with conflict. It's Awaken Your Spirit. Stay tuned.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Awaken Your Spirit. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Aaron Garcia.
And I'm Veronica Mendez Garcia. And our show is about inspiration, motivation, and developing the mindset to live a happy and abundant life.
We are live here every Mondays and Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern. We are live here on Facebook and on YouTube. If you'd like to join us each week when we have our show, make sure you, if you're watching on Facebook, turn on that live notification button here in the feed. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to our channel and click on that little bell icon so you always know when we have a new video that's posted. So today we have a very exciting show for you guys here today. But before we get into our topic, which is dealing with conflict, we always like to start off with our first segment of our show, which is our inspirational moment with Veronica.
So inspirational moments is when I like to read something inspirational and interesting. Today I have I haven't read from this book to you yet, but it's called Essays and Poems by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there's the picture. And this section of the book, it's called The Oversoul. And it says, the supreme critic on all the errors of the past and the present, and the only prophet of that which must be, is that great nature in which we rest, as the earth lies in the soft arms of the atmosphere. That unity, that oversoul, within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. That common heart of which all sincere conversation is the worship, to which all right action is submission. That overpowering reality which confutes our tricks and talents and constrains everyone to pass for what he is, and to speak from his character and not from his tongue, and which everyone tends to aim to pass into our thought and hand, and become wisdom and virtue, and power and beauty. We live in succession, in division, in parts, and particles. Meantime within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one.
Mm-hmm. I like that part when they're talking about, speak from your character rather than your tongue.
Yeah.
Meaning that, express yourself through your actions rather than just talking.
Just saying that,
because there could be a lot of people out there that say things or talk, but their behaviors and their actions, conflict what they say. Yeah. And that's one of a big thing for us is really to establish that character, to practice exactly what we preach and what we talk about. We go through our challenges as well, but we also use our tools to help us get through those difficult times.
Yes, it's walking the talk and practice what you preach and things like that, because it's important to do that, because it's one thing to have all this book knowledge and you can regurgitate something that you've read in a book, front to back, but then your actions, if you're not living by what you're teaching, then people will tell, and they'll know the truth by the way you behave and by the action. So it's it's kind of like wearing a mask in a sense when people do that, but it's important to walk the talk.
So that was the inspirational moment for today with Veronica. If you guys enjoyed that, give us some hearts and give some thumbs up here into the video. And we hope you guys have been enjoying this. And if you know that there's anybody that can benefit from the message of our show here, and just please share this with them. Tag them here into the feed, because we never know who this message is going to impact. And just by sharing, you might be helping somebody in their life today, because they might be going through some challenges. Yeah. And that has been our experience doing this over the past 3 years. And it's been very rewarding for us.
Yeah, it has.
So So I want to say hello to a few people that are joining in with us this morning. I want to say hello to Gil, our Solis. He says, buenos and benedicios dios amigos. He says, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome you guys here. And if you guys are here, give us your comments and thoughts here into the feed. If you have a question, put that here as well. And let us know where you're coming from. If you're new, type new here into the feed because we love to say hello to you guys. Craig Garcia says, I can improve on my dealing with conflict. I usually just walk away and say, forget it.
Yeah. But, when you think about that, when you walk away, are you still thinking about it? And is it still going through your mind? And that's, what we have to be aware of is like, how are we still feeling even after we walk away? Are we still like running the scenario in our mind and, creating our own story?
And I love having these topics because they're issues that we all deal with.
Yeah.
Everybody can relate to this. And we would love to share our experiences with you guys and how we overcome a lot of these obstacles and how we still work with them because we're still always working through them.
Yeah.
And we'll share our experience with you guys.
Yeah. And also what Craig mentioned, walking away, that's actually a good thing to walk away and give yourself time to kind of release some of that emotion to where you're not dealing with the conflict in a state of anger, because otherwise you might say things that you don't mean. And, we've all done that before where, we're in a state of anger and then we just say something and it's like, oops, I said that out of anger. And then later you think about it, you're like, oh, why did I say that? But that's why it is important to calm ourselves first and then have that conversation when we're in a calmer state.
So on our today's show, we're talking about dealing with conflict. And we were reading an article. It was about storytelling. And it was about writers and how, if you want to create a screenplay is, what they talk about the essence of what goes on into a good screenplay.
Yeah.
And one thing they were talking about is this concept of conflict. And it was interesting because when I read it, it not only related into the stories of things that we like to watch on TV from movies, but it really is how we play things out in our own entire life. And they described 4 different types of conflicts. The first type of conflict that we'll discuss here, and we'll have a discussion about it, is internal conflict. And that is the conflict within ourselves.
Yeah.
There's also the conflict with other people. Then there's the conflict with our environment and the things that are around us. And the last one is that conflict with the supernatural, the things that are unseen, that the unknown that we all deal with. And we can have a conflict in each of those areas. Yeah. And that's what creates the drama. It creates the excitement, something we have to overcome in our journey that we call life. And so the first one I like to talk about is the internal conflict, because this is one that we all deal with. And this is what we help people with the most, is more the conflicts they have within themselves and where they find incongruencies in their life.
Yeah. And in reality, it's pretty much like all the conflict that's around us, it's really all internal. Because it's how we perceive things, how we react or choose to respond to things. And we all have this internal battle that we deal with. And, sometimes it's like our own battle with ourselves, like you mentioned, like what's right, what's wrong and things like that. But when dealing with others, that's still an internal battle as well. But we can be like our, how they say, our worst enemy sometimes.
Yeah. And just from our experience over the past decade working with people, it's been interesting to see the commonalities of when we're all creators and there's things that we want to create in our life. We have maybe a vision or a dream of how we would like life to be, things we'd like to attract into our life. And people will say they want things, but what happens is when we talk about, walking the talk, what you say with your mouth and what you feel and what your characters on the inside, we find that there's a lot of incongruencies and a lot of conflict with what people say that they want.
Yeah.
As an example, people may want more income or more money, but maybe there's an internal fear on the inside that says, well, if I earn more money, that means I'm going to be more busy. I won't have time for my family.
Yeah.
So that becomes an internal conflict with what you say you want. You want to attract a great relationship into your life, but you have issues trusting others. That's an internal conflict. And this is what we call incongruencies. And this is why people may not attract what they truly want in their life, or why they might create what we call resistance because of that internal conflict.
Yeah, and the resistance can get in the way of what you say you want. So like Aaron mentioned, like you say you want something, and then something within you is like fighting itself. And it's like, I want that, but there's something here, and that's where you can self-sabotage. Maybe opportunities that could have been great, you maybe turn away, or you just overlook it. But it's what we're radiating out, and then what we attract.
Mm-hmm. And so we can have many different internal conflicts. So we can have that conflict with ourselves, as people might have conflict with how they look and how they feel about themselves. Mm-hmm. The conflict on their skills and their abilities. There's an old story. It's in the book of the Bhagavad Gita, and it talks about this battle, and it's called the Battle of Kurukshetra. And the symbology of this whole battle and the opposing armies is each character represents an internal process that we all go through. Mm-hmm. And it's very fascinating how they break it down. And it was broken down by Paramahansa Yogananda when we read it, but it was so interesting because the main character in the story is named Arjuna. And his mentor, his guru, is Krishna. And Krishna represents the spirit. And what Arjuna represents in all of us is that concept of self-control, where all of the other opposing armies, we're dealing with the opposition of our habits. We're dealing with our senses. We're dealing with all these things that create conflict within us and our outside world. And we're all going through this internal battle mm-hmm. of what's right, what's wrong, what should we be doing, what's in my best interest, am I following my intuition, or do we become overcome by our old habits?
Old habits, our senses. And sometimes Aaron and I, we, when something happens and maybe I don't know, like a situation occurs, and then the mind is like, maybe telling us certain things, or there's maybe a negative emotion that comes up. Sometimes I'll say, "Oh, Arjuna," and you do too. Like, we'll kind of to maybe ease the tension of certain things, or if he's mm-hmm. frustrated with something, I'm like, "Oh, Arjuna."
It's like those code words that helps, like reminds us. It's like a trigger effect that allows us to, okay, let's think for just a second.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a little thing that we do to help just like you said, ease mm-hmm. the tension. So
when we're dealing with conflict, and we feel and believe that this is the one major one that we're constantly going to be dealing with throughout our life here. And the concept is how can we overcome? How can we create self-mastery within ourselves? And a lot of it is dealing with, what serves us and what does not. And we have to be able to control that. We are in control. The only things we're in control of is our thoughts. We're in control of mm-hmm. how we react and how we feel our emotions. And that allows us to control our own behavior. We may not be able to control the outside environment. We definitely can't control other people, but we can control how we react and respond to others in our situations.
Yeah. Let's go to some of the comments here.
Gil says, are you talking about me? Because it's hitting 100% on target. I could be talking to everybody. Yeah. I could be talking about me. I could be talking about us, because these are similar experiences that we all mm-hmm. go through.
Yeah.
But we see it all the time. And you see these experiences, you only might see them on the news. You look at like celebrities who may have committed suicide or go through these conflicts. You think from the surface, it seems like their life is great, but there's this internal battle they all go through. The first person that comes to my mind is Robin Williams. Because I just recently caught an interview with his son on another show, and they were talking about mental health, where, you think he was great and he helped create laughter in so many people, but there was this huge internal conflict within himself that he had a hard time overcoming. Yeah. And a lot of people do.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people maybe don't know where to go for help, or they feel maybe embarrassed. But again, that's the internal battle of like, what are people going to think about me if I come out and say like, I need help? And, a lot of times I think it's more powerful for people to do that, because then they're allowing other people to say like, oh, they need help as well, so I'm not alone. And because a lot of times when you're mm-hmm. in that state, you feel like you're the only one. And Gil, he says, He says, that's funny. I was thinking about that story a few days ago, the Arjuna.
Oh, really? Interesting. But it's a fascinating story because it represents our life and the things that we're all going to be battling with at some point. When we have our own internal battles, and everybody experiences those in their own way. But it's how do we choose to overcome? How can we self-reflect and see, and it's like that self-reflection at the end of the day. Who won the battle? And this is what always goes on in that story is there's that person that is represented as introspection that is going to look at both sides of the situation overview and say, like, who won the battle for today? Was it our old habits, the things that are trying to, our ego that gets in the way? And pretty much what that is, it's the battle between our ego and our soul. And did our ego take over today, or did our true essence, our soul, win the battle of the day? Did we contain ourselves? Did we control our own habits? Did we do the things that we really want to do in our life? And that's the battle we're always going to go through.
Yeah, and when you think about the soul, it's like it's coming from that light, that love energy. So when you're talking about soul versus ego, the ego is just like wanting to be right, or wanting to win, wanting to have the last word in a conflict or a argument. And when you come from a place of love in a state of conflict, it diffuses all that energy. Like it will automatically stop everything.
Yeah.
And the person who can truly say, I'm sorry, like this was my fault, that's coming more from that place of love, but when they're really sorry about it. And it will diffuse the situation, because most people expect other people to start saying mean things back and forth. But when you can say, you know what, it was my fault, I admit it, I'm sorry, then it's kind of like, okay. And then it's almost like they don't know what to do, or the other person is kind of like surprised by that reaction. So some people can look at it like, oh, they're giving up, or they're weak, and they, things like that. But it's really the opposite of that.
Yeah. And we've experienced this and practiced it, and it works really, really well once you learn how to do that. But again, it's our own internal conflict that can get in the way.
Yeah.
Do we feel like we're righteous? Do we feel like something within us is being violated? And do we have to feel like we get defensive? And where does that come from? Where do we get this idea that we have to attack back? And a lot of that's conditioned.
Yeah.
When you think about it, is what was your upbringing? What was taught to you when you were younger? And that could be from your parents. What happened to you during school? Your friends, your peers. How did other people react to situations? If someone got upset, what happened? Or there was a conflict at school. Most times, at least what I saw, a fight broke out. So one person says something, another person might attack back, and it goes back and forth.
And it doesn't solve anything. Whenever there's that back and forth, nothing gets solved, because nobody's really listening to each other or really feeling the other person. It's just words going back and forth, and a lot of it is negative. And we see a lot of this in movies. And in movies, there's always a battle with someone or something,
and somebody's got to overcome and triumph and win.
And especially if it's dealing with other people or other groups of people, oh, they did this to us, now we got to fight back. And it's always fighting back. But what if they did the opposite? And maybe fight back, but with love? How would that change the situation?
So that's interesting. They bring that up, like we call it fighting back. And then we're talking about movies. And I love watching movies because they always have a lot of great symbology. And the one movie that pops in my mind as you're talking about this is the movie Fight Club. And it was with Brad Pitt and Edward Norton. And the concept of this, it's a big spoiler alert here. But
it's an old movie.
But it's an old movie. So if you haven't seen it by now,
I don't think I've seen it.
Go watch it. We'll watch it later. But the concept of the movie is there's the two oppositions. There's the friends that become enemies later on, and there's being a conflict. And towards the end, the spoiler alert is that the gentleman that and the character that Edward Norton plays, he has a split personality. And the person that Brad Pitt plays is that split personality, but you don't know that until the end. And you realize that he's fighting himself. He's fighting himself. This is the other part of him that's creating conflict. until he finally realizes that at the end, as he realizes when he's being held hostage, that he's the one that's in control. We're like, if you're me, then I'm in control. So we all deal with this internal battle of ourselves, that other part of ourselves that may not be serving us very well. Again, our ego and our soul. And when we realize that we are in control then of ourselves, not other people, but ourselves, then we can start to create. Then we can start to really make things and change things the way we want them to. But we have to be aware of that, and we have to be able to know when we're being taken over by that.
Yeah. And it's also like realizing that nobody can make you angry. Nobody can make you feel all these negative emotions. It's like we choose to react out of anger, and we choose to react with all these negative things that were either passed down from parents or by school, by watching movies. And it's like we can choose to respond in a different way. Like, instead of reacting out of anger and saying all kinds of mean things to somebody else, we can choose to respond calmly and maybe say something that's the opposite of what they're expecting us to say.
Yeah. And you have to practice that.
It is a practice.
Because if up till now, your habit or your normal reaction is to lash out. And that could be, again, we're talking about internal conflict and conflict with others in this moment. And I'll start with the internal conflict is we do something and we beat ourselves up for that. Do we put ourselves down? Oh, you idiot, you're stupid, you shouldn't have done that. And we feel guilty about the things that we did, or maybe we failed at something and we might tell ourselves that we're not good enough, we can't do this. Now that becomes an internal conflict, and it can stop us from actually moving forward and continuing into our goal. How many times have we ever felt self-defeated? And I mean, I know I have, but I had to have that internal battle. I had to overcome that conflict, and I still work with it, but I'm much better at it today than I had been in the past.
Yeah.
And Veronica's watched me go through my own internal battles. It's like I think you kind of sit there and eat popcorn while you watch me go through these sometimes. But it becomes so real in your consciousness that when you realize that it's just in your consciousness, and it's a thought battle, it's an emotional battle that we all go through. And that's how we experience the outside world. And that's what starts to create our conflict with other people. If we're ever in conflict with ourselves, how do we expect ourselves to handle other people? So when we can work on ourselves and learn to heal from things in the past, experiences that we had, understand who you truly are, and that we're all equal, that we are able to create things just like anybody else. We can do anything that we put our mind to. Then we can say, okay, I'm going to be calm. And we work through that. And you have to train yourself over and over. You do it when you're in a very calm state. If this was to happen, how would I want to react? And you rehearse that in your mind. And so that way, when the emotions starts to come in and take over, you at least have a game plan. But if once the emotion's there, you don't know how to react, you're going to go back to default, and your old habit's going to take over.
Yeah. And another way to kind of practice this would be to look at everyone like children, even yourself. Like, if you do something, say you mess up and you do something wrong, look at yourself as a child, and how would you speak to that child? Would you belittle him? Would you, especially like say it's like a little baby toddler learning to walk, and we've used this example. Like, would you tell him he's dumb because he fell down? You wouldn't say that. So it's, if you can look at yourself like a child and say, you know what, it's okay, learn from this, and you'll do better next time, and do positive reinforcement with yourself. And the more you can do that, and then later on you can do that with others. Because when you can see the other person as a child and the way they're behaving in the moment, say they're angry about something, they're yelling and having a tantrum, look at them as that little child. What did they experience as a child? And most people that lash out of anger, they've had a rough childhood, and we don't know that because we weren't there. Sometimes we were, but it's really all the experiences that they've had that is, and that's how they know to react to certain
that's
things.
How they internalize
the experience. It. Yeah. So if you can learn to maybe be more kind to others when they're going through something like that, and have that compassion, then things will really change. And people will be like, whoa, like they didn't yell at me. They didn't put me down. And then they're going to start to look at other people that way and possibly treat them in the same way.
Absolutely.
It's a ripple effect.
And so Gil says, I would say, don't worry, we win at the end. And so then, and those are different things. Yeah. So we have all our processes, find what works for you and what's that concept. So if I say I'm going to be the better person in these situations, now we're going to talk about when we're having conflict with other people is how do we want this to end? Now, most people want to win. That's the concept that we've all been trained and taught. Even in sports, it's all about one person has to win, one person's got to lose. We hear in business, you have to learn how to crush your competition, which means that you're gonna put somebody out of business in a sense, but that's not necessarily how it has to be. And when we go back and look at, well, is this true, and does that work very well? Maybe it's some people might say it's worked because they get their way if things happen, and we've experienced this with people that they're training, the way they've trained themselves and their strategy to get what they want in life is to create fear and anger, and out of anger with people, because fear can be a very great motivator, which can people will do what they want. But what now is that relationship between those two people, that group of people? Now there's going to create some internal conflict where, especially if it's in business, if you got employees that are afraid of you, how much more creative are they? Are they willing to do the work that's necessary to make your business very successful? And vice versa. If you got a boss that's, you're afraid of, and think about it. It's like you fear just not losing your job, and it creates tension. It creates uneasiness. We feel you can feel shut down without being able to express and fully be creative in whatever endeavor you are in.
Yeah, and people will internalize it differently. It's like some people, will do whatever the person says because they're afraid of them. Other people might rebel and do the opposite, or maybe, it's not allowing the creative side to come out in a person because they're probably just doing just enough to get by, or just enough like of the work that they're needed to do. But if you allow people to be creative and come from that creative space without fear, they could do so much better by allowing their selves to be expressed. And, sometimes people don't realize that, like, oh, if they're scared of me, they'll do whatever I say. But then they're not really going to want to go above and beyond to let that creative side come out, because they're in that fear mode. Yeah. And, for me growing up, it was my dad used those fear tactics with us as well. And I would say when I was really young, I was more afraid and kind of didn't do things to try to upset him. But as I got older and my conscious mind started to kind of make my own decisions, it's like I was able to distinguish, well, I don't agree with him, so I'm going to do it my way, or I'm going to do things the opposite. And I kind of rebelled with certain things with him. And it was almost like that fear tactic didn't work, because I was still doing things. If I was to get caught, yeah, I would get in trouble, but I didn't really care at that point.
Yeah, the point is not allowing other people to rally and stir up your emotions. Everybody lives in their own world. And that's one thing I've learned to experience, is like what that means is, we experience the world differently.
Yeah.
We all live in the same world, or it might be in the same environment. We could be in the same household, but we all have different experiences based on the information that we take in and the meaning that we give to it. And that's how our mind works. And we're being bombarded by so much information. We can only filter in about, 10 bits of information out of trillions of information that we're being bombarded with. And there was talked to us even by Dr. Steve Talman, who's on our show last week. He mentioned the same exact thing. And it's fascinating is how much information gets distorted and misinterpreted. And one of the main reasons for conflict or anger or when things stir up, a lot of it comes from misunderstanding.
Yeah.
Something got said and someone misinterpreted what they said, meaning, and they said, well, this means this to me, but they never expressed that to the other person. Where, I mean, how many of you had that experience where you may have done something or said something and somebody got really upset about that, and you were like, what did I do? I didn't mean anything negative or bad by that, but how did that person interpret that? And that's all based on their experience of what that means to them. It may mean something completely different to you, but to them it could be a trigger based on past experiences.
Yeah, and that's how like we live in this world together, but our own internal world is completely different from everyone, because we have our internal world that we create based on what we see, what we feel, what's taught to us, and how we perceive things to be. And that's why, like, even a household of, like, say, a family, 2 parents, 3 kids, each of the kids are going to internalize what's going on in their own way. So it's like they've created their own world in their mind. So when, sometimes it's interesting when you get together with family and you start talking about certain things, and there was an event that happened, everyone has their own perspective on how it happened. And one person can say, well, I experienced this and this happened. And they're like, well, I didn't see it that way. It was like this way. But in a sense, they're all right, because they all internalized it in their own way. But it's interesting how, based on how we think and how we feel, how we perceive the world around us.
And without all the right information, how much of it do we make it up? And then that becomes a belief system. So we have to really challenge our belief systems often and say, is that true? Where did this belief come from? And is that true? And then you can ask yourself, what do I want to believe? What would I like to change about me? What would I like to change about this environment? And, Gil says, in track and field, you learn that you can't win all the time, but you can improve yourself each time, which is a win.
Yeah. And self-improvement is always a great thing. And it's just a way to, like, how can I improve maybe on my performance, on running it, whatever it is. It's like we always have room for improvement, and we're never going to learn everything about the world. And that's the beauty of it, because if we did, and we've mentioned this before, it's like if we knew every single thing about the world and everyone in it and everything, it's like there's no room for growth. Like, how are we going to grow if we know every single thing?
And that's what we were talking about earlier. That's the concept of conflict in the storytelling is, without conflict, without opposition, stories would be really boring.
It would be boring. And then there's no progress.
It's that hero's journey. Like, is we're overcoming something, where we are growing to overcome challenges, to be better than we were yesterday, and be better than we were a year ago. And when I think what happens when people get, like, either depressed or stagnant or that melancholy or bored is because they're not challenging themselves, or there's people that just give up and say, this is just the way it is. This is who I am. I can't change. And that becomes a victim mentality, because they come to this belief that there's nothing they can do to change themselves. The way the world is, they've been victimized by the world or other people. And this is just the way it is. And this is how my life's going to be always. And when that becomes a true belief system, you see what it does to people. I mean, look at their behavior, look at their attitude towards things, because it's like that, it's giving up. But we can change anything right now. But we do have to work on the conflict. We have to work on our internal conflicts. We have to challenge our beliefs. We have to challenge our habits. And each day it's like going to battle and overcoming the habits that don't serve us very well. It's the attitudes that don't serve us. And how do we want to perceive? So this is things that I've been even working with. And you're kind of the one with a pen, kind of keeping track of in my. It's like we were watching this thing about the driver's test, and they're, did you take the right turn? Check. And did you pass? And one thing I've always been working on is to be able to respond better in different situations. And when you're not in the situation, it seems very easy. I would do this, I would do that. But
watching, like, observing you, it's not that I'm just sitting back and taking notes. It's for me, it's also a lesson, because I'm observing. If there's a conflict with you and someone else, I'm observing to people how they react, how they choose to respond. And also for me, it's having the patience to be able to not get in the middle of it, and it's like maybe taking that step back and just maybe just sending them love and putting the light around them. But it's like we're all working together on this, even though maybe there's more tension between two people. If it's still in my surrounding area, I'm still part of it. So it's not like I'm just taking notes. It's like I have my own internal battle, as we were saying, as far as like how am I choosing to react versus respond, and in regards to what I'm watching.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, like, what I've seen is two people having conflict. Maybe they're talking about something, and then a third person, they see it and they get in it and they get involved, and then now there's three people going back and forth.
And it's like the fire just gets bigger and bigger.
Because it's so easy to just jump in and like get involved. But if it's, if it's not really not my issue, it's like, okay, I still have to choose to be patient and just observe and handle my own internal emotions.
Yeah. And it's being mindful of, because there's so many different situations, is knowing when it's time for you to step in. And that's usually if there's like a safety issue involved, maybe, what do you do in those? And there's different scenarios we won't get into, but this concept was I was upset by something, and I realized it was getting to me. And it's funny because when I feel the emotions kick in, it's by understanding it, I'm also observing it at the same time, which is very interesting, because you're going through the internal process in your head. And I just go quiet when I get upset, because I internalize, and it's like I'm thinking, okay, don't feel like this. Here's what we can do in the situations. And sometimes the mind can go through a downward spiral and go the way that you might want it, which can create more tension. And I realized at the end, it's like, okay, it's like looking at all the different options. Okay, if I go down door number 1 and do this, what will be the consequence of that? Because there's always an effect to a cause. If you do something, whether it's going on in your life, your relationship with other people, there is always a cause to that relationship. Whether it's a great relationship with somebody else, or maybe that relationship isn't so good. There's a cause for that. And so how you respond to anything, there's going to be effect. And so you can look at different scenarios. And if I go down door A, if I say, okay, I might want to say this, or I might want to do this, what will be the end result of that? And then you can say, okay, this will happen, this could happen. Okay, if I go down door B, door C, door D, and I go these routes, and you get a scenario to what the end result could be with each of those. And the first part is, okay, which one would be the best ideal? And most people just, they just kind of cover their eyes and they go down the door that they first touch. And that sometimes creates issues in the long run. But I realized that, okay, well, if there's a conflict, and let's say maybe I feel righteous and I feel like I'm right about something, and I can say I can stand my ground. That's usually what happens. A lot of people are taught to fight back until someone wins. Like, I won't give in, but someone's got to win. That's how fights happen. And so you could go down that route, but it's going to create more tension, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, okay, how could I diffuse the situation? First, I got to diffuse my own emotions first. And when you start to analyze is, am I 100% right in the situation? And sometimes that's a hard question to ask, because sometimes what you might see in other people, you have to also look at yourself and say, do I do something similar? Because what you might be seeing in them that they're doing, their actions, in some way, shape, or form, they may be doing something similar that you do. Maybe in a different way, different form, not exactly the same thing, but it represents something similar. And you don't like that. And sometimes it's a very hard thing to look at yourself, because someone says, well, and you might have experienced this. You say so-and-so is doing this or doing that, and someone looks at you and they're analyzing, well, you do that too. And you're like, no, I don't. And sometimes that's been a lesson for me, is when I feel like I get upset about something, the first question I ask, do I do this? Because that's what self-growth is all about, is learning to, and the mirror image is there to show you areas you might need to work on, especially if it's upsetting you.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing, and that will help to calm the emotions down. So before I get to a conflict is, if I say you can't be doing this, what could that person say back? Because they might see that exact same thing in you. Or there might be other things in you that bother them.
Yeah.
And so that's where you have open conversation, but it's difficult and it's not the best idea to do that in a highly emotional state, especially in an emotion of anger and this hostility. You want to calm down first so you can have a rational conversation.
And also the actions that you take when you're in that emotional state, something very simple, but if you're emotional and you're not really thinking about the consequences if you do something, what can happen? So if it's even a little simple thing, that can turn into something big if you're doing it out of anger.
Yeah.
And there's consequences. So instead of reacting and just going automatic and doing an action out of that state of anger, it's like before you do anything, calm yourself first. And then once you're calm, then look at the situation and start taking action. But something so small can turn into something very big if it's in the wrong energy.
Yeah. And so in this situation I looked at different doors, and there was an action step that I could have looked at as, if I do this, this is good. It can create something. And a lot of times when you're in a highly emotional state, your emotions can get the best of you and you may want to do something, and all reasoning goes out the door. So that part of me understood what the concept would be, but I think at an emotional state, I did. And it wasn't major, but it was enough to create tension.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that could happen. And so I had to own up to my actions, right? And then asking the other person, I try to do it in the best calm state, even though I was kind of a little bothered on the inside. I approached the situation in a very as calm as I could be, rather than lashing out, because I knew that wouldn't do anything. But later on, that one action step that I took, it came back to me.
It came back.
Remember, this is what we call karma. It's like, well, your actions will eventually come back to you, good or bad. And so now there was a conflict between me and this other person.
Because it was done out of a state of anger or frustration.
Yeah. And because they were upset by the action step that I took. And the first thought could be, do I stand my ground? Do we try to conflict back? Well, do I feel justified why I did this because you did? We could have gone down that whole entire route. And it got to the point where I understood, even though I might have still felt it, but I was in a very calmer state at the time, he was right. It's like, yes, I knew ahead of time because I didn't listen to my intuition when it was telling me not to do it. It's like, you did it. So I apologized.
Mm-hmm. And
I said, you're right. I am sorry. That my action step, I apologize. That was not the right thing to do. I'm sorry. I apologize. And what was interesting in that moment was the reaction that happened in the other person. Because I believe that they're so used to other people just fighting back.
Yeah.
And it's going to escalate into something bigger. It threw them off.
Mm-hmm.
It really kind of dampened the flame. Like, it was like they didn't know what to say back.
You're sorry.
Yeah. And then even when I said that, my energy started to calm down.
Yeah.
Because I owned up to my own actions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very challenging thing to do, is to own up to your own mistakes. Mm-hmm. Maybe we did something, maybe we said something to other people, and we have to admit, you know what, my actions were not the best thing.
Yeah, because then when you hear the story from the other person, like, well, because of your action, this could have happened, and this could have been a really big, not so good situation. So then when you think about it, from their perspective after listening, it's like, oh, wow, like, yeah, that could have gone bad. But it's like, then you can see it, from someone else's point of view. But it's always put yourself in the other person's shoes to try to see, the result of certain things. And
because of going down that direction, everything calmed down, and it's like we made up. And it was like everything was really good after that. But, we got some tension out, but it didn't escalate anything major. But it was just, having a conversation about who's right, who's wrong. But it's just admitting, like, when we're wrong about something, it's just we admit to that. But a lot of times we might feel that, what are they going to think? What are people going to think about me if I admit to my mistake? Are they going to think about me wrong? So a lot of times it's a strategy that people create internally, that whatever it is, I'm always going to try to make myself right. Now, they may not say that, but
that's the ego side.
That's the ego
talking when you're worried about what people think. But when you're coming from that place of love and sincere apologies for something that you did, it's really a different energy. Like when you're coming from that ego state, It's like you're only worried about yourself and what's going on with you. But when you're coming from love, it's like you're embracing the other person as for who they are. And also it's putting the ego aside and allowing your true spirit to come out.
Yeah, and just have rational conversations with people. And we've talked about two different scenarios of conflict. So we talked about that internal conflict that we all have within ourselves. It's how we feel about ourselves, how we think about ourselves. Are we capable? Are we incapable of doing something? And how do we feel about that? We have confliction in our goal. We say we want things, but internally we maybe have fear towards that. And so there's that battle. We create resistance in our own life. It's like, why isn't this happening? Why do these things keep happening to me in my life? Because there's some internal conflict that's going on within you that you may not be aware of.
Yeah.
And that's going to translate into how you respond and react with other people outside. Now that creates conflict with others. And so when you understand that concept, and we mentioned the law of cause and effect, why do things happen? What was the effect of this? And what caused that? We can always trace it down to an internal process. So if you're looking to how do I better handle other people, if you want to be better with other people, the first person you have to be better with is yourself. The more you can be better with yourself, the easier it is to handle other people. Because a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes these people are the mirror reflection of yourself that you don't like, and you're just seeing it in them. And that starts to bring up all of your stuff.
Yeah. There's a story about Paramahansa Yogananda where I think he was walking down some street, I don't know, and then these 2 or 3 guys approached him, and I think they held him at gunpoint, and they were trying to rob him. And he mentioned something like, I can give you all the money I have, but you'll never be able to take my riches, or something like that. And then they're like, what? Like they weren't really sure what he was talking about, but he looked at them. He gave them a look, but it was like coming from a place of love versus like anger, like, oh, these guys are going to rob me. And he just looked into their eyes with this love and internal love that he had, seeing the light in them. And then all of a sudden it was like they changed, and they're like, I don't know what you did to me, but or what you did to us, but we're never going to do this again. And it just like changed them. And his internal energy, like whatever he was radiating out to them, it really changed them. And they just like ran away or walked away, and they said that they were never going to do that again. But he was able to change those people just by his own energy that he was radiating. So it's very interesting to, it's like how he chose to handle that situation. But this is someone who's practiced this for years and years. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. And so, we're talking about internal conflict today. And a lot of us go through these internal conflicts. We go through outside conflicts. And how do we choose to handle that? And when we can learn to control ourselves within, that's that battle Kurukshetra we talked about earlier. It's that battle between our ego and the battle between our soul. What are we conflicted with on a day-to-day basis? And there's a lot of mental health issues out there, a lot of mental suffering. We've heard even through this whole COVID situations, recently there's somebody that, suicide rates have gone up because people feel isolated. They're not in connection with other people, because we need to be connected with other people. That's part of who we are. And when we feel, and one of the things that challenges people a lot when they feel like they're alone.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you're alone, like you're going through something, you realize that just based on that statistic that I just mentioned, is you and many other people are going through something similar. You have challenges, other people have challenges too. It's like, where do you turn to? And sometimes it's hard. You feel like there's no one to talk to, but there's many people that you can talk to. And I think when we can realize that, and that's a perception, right? When we change our perception of the world around us, if you're thinking that everybody's life is doing great and yours isn't doing so well, there's other people that might look like everything's great, but on the inside, it might not be. And they might need some help. Yeah. And we've seen that. There's been times that I've needed help. There's sometimes Veronica's needed help. And we've helped each other. And we learn through these experiences. But the more that we can heal on the inside, maybe it's upbringing, how parents treated you, what was said to you over and over again as a young child that was ingrained in your subconscious mind, and that we are capable of doing so much, but we have to be able to see that. We have to be able to believe that. But it takes practice and experience. And you need to change that belief system if you want things to change for yourself.
Yeah, and if you're going through something where you're just like down, like the lowest you've ever been, reach out to someone and put the ego aside and just reach out to someone and ask for help, because they might be able to help you either themselves or find some resources for you where you can get help. But it's like you're never alone. Like there's so many, people out there willing to help, and you just never know. And you might find it in somebody else. You might find a book, an article that you can read, but go online if you need, a place to really talk to someone, because there are resources out there. But also people in your inner circle that reach out to them, say, hey, I'm going through a tough time. I need help. I need to talk to someone. And it's sometimes it's because our ego gets in the way, and it's like, oh, what are they going to think? But that doesn't matter. Like what matters is that you find the help, and there's plenty of people out there that are willing to help, and that's the beauty of it. And sometimes because you ask them for help, some people feel like, oh, I'm going to bother them. But then when you do ask, it's almost like a sense like, oh, like they came to me because they look at me like someone who can help them.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, once you put that ego aside, like things that can, that come from it.
Yeah. And the last point that we'll make is when we're talking about dealing with conflict, and we'll talk about the concept of dealing with other people. Is, I did mention that a lot of times it could be that mirror reflection, but sometimes it's not. There are those moments when it's just, some people are really going through a hard internal conflict, and they just can't see things maybe the way you do. So one thing we mentioned to other people as well is sometimes you're not going to change. You can't change that person. You can't change situations. So one of the best things you could do is just, can you be brave enough to just walk away and not get caught up into it?
What do you mean?
What I mean by that is there could be people that just their natural reaction is to always put people down, to always love to start conflict. And you can choose, do you want to get caught up in it, or you choose to stay away from it? And it may not be anything to necessarily do with you, but what that means is if you feel like something's there is do you learn to just heal from that and allow other people to be who they are, and not start getting caught up in your head about what they're doing? Is how much are you dwelling on that? So the concept is, if you're thinking about this on the inside, maybe you're not really having a conflict with somebody physically, but you're having a conflict with them in your mind. That's just about the same thing, and probably more destructive, because now how is it making you feel? And the more that you dwell on that in your own mind, you're giving energy, you're giving power to that, and you're going to start to see that experience. And again, if that's going to start to really kick up your emotional state, and then what's that going to do to your behavior and your actions, and what could be the result of that?
Yeah. Okay. So at first I thought we were talking about asking for help, and then you walking away. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about?
I mentioned another point.
Yeah, but that does make sense. Like when you get emotionally involved into what someone else is doing without saying anything to them, it's pretty much the same or even worse, because you're dwelling on a situation or on an action that somebody else did, and it's making you feel bad. So your vibration will lower, and you'll tend to attract more situations that resemble that, or just more negative energies and situations that come your way. So that's why it's important to pay attention, have that awareness. What are you thinking about most of the day? Hopefully you're more aware and thinking of like more positive things, because the moment you start to dwell, it's like your vibration's going to drop, and you're going to attract things that aren't going to be so nice. So it's very important to think more positive, keep your vibration high. And if you're having trouble because it's like the thoughts keep coming in, listen to something that's more inspirational and something that's going to uplift you, and that's more positive, because there's certain things that we might find funny, but when you really look at the background of it, it could be, maybe it appears funny, but then if they're putting other people down or putting themselves down, it's really not that positive. So really pay attention to what you're soaking in, the information.
Yeah. Eric Swanson, who's joining with us, he
Hey,
says,
Eric.
I always have a conflict with myself each morning. Then I say, don't worry, you got this, bud. And sometimes
Awesome.
you might need to say that, just say,
Yeah.
you got this, because
hmm
we're going to have our really, really good days when we feel like we're just on top of the world. And there's going to be those days when you just feel like we're dragging out of bed. Like this doesn't feel like a good day. And we all have those moments. And that's when we really have to have that self-talk to say, everything's going to be okay. You got this. And it's like whatever mantra works best for you. You know, that's why, you know, reading something inspirational, watching something inspirational, even the first part of the day is put something very positive into your mind right when you wake up in the morning, because how you start your day is how your day is going to end. And so like, why not start it off great? And then you're going to see the momentum of that build up. But how many of those times when you feel like you wake up and you're not feeling so good, and it seems like one thing after the next, it seems to go wrong. You're not really, you're not feeling like your best. And it just seems like, but rather than those days where you feel like just refresh, you feel like I can get out of bed in the morning without hitting the alarm. And it's like, it seems like you want to just, you're productive. You want to do things. And so like, just, you'll have those days, but learn how to push through those.
Yeah. And again, like we mentioned earlier, ask for help, because put the ego aside, feel free to ask anyone for help. And, that'll really, maybe they have a solution for you or can find someone to help you.
Absolutely. So we hope you guys have enjoyed today's show. We were talking about dealing with conflict, and we talked about two things. We talked about dealing with the conflict within ourselves, and then dealing with the conflict with others.
Yeah, we all have it. It's part of life, and we're always going to have some kind of conflict and internal battle that goes on. But it's okay. That's part of life, and it's how we choose to deal with it and move forward, learn and grow from it. And that's what life's about. That's why we're on this journey. And it wouldn't be a journey if there was no room for growth.
Yeah. And so if you find yourself dealing with any type of conflict, is, what could you do to make things better? And you want to do those when you're not in a highly emotional state, because all thinking and reasoning goes out the door. And really look at whatever, come up with different scenarios. This is something that really helps me is, okay, well, I can go this route. I can do this. I can think this. I can feel this. If I'm not feeling very good, if I decide to stay in this mode all day long, I can choose, well, I'm just going to be like this for the rest of the week. You get to choose that. You can say, well, do I choose to stay like this or feel like this? Or do I choose to find something to help me get out of it, to make me feel better, to help me feel more inspired? And what are the consequences of each one, right? What's the effect? So I choose to do door A or door B. If I choose to stay in a not so great mood, what could be the effect of that the rest of the day? How can that affect other people? How can that affect my business, my relationships? And if I choose to feel better and do something, same question, how's that going to affect everything else? And whatever one feels is more ideal to you, and usually it's going to be the one that works well for everybody and everybody's happy and loving and healthy. That's the best route to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and don't beat yourself up if one of those days you choose to go down the other door. It's like, if you find that and it's not working for you, you get to choose to go the other direction.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, even if you go down that door that maybe isn't the best one, there are going to be things that happen that you're like, oh, like I learned from this. And it's paying attention, like, what are you focusing on? Because whatever you're thinking about and you're focusing your energy on, if it's not making you feel good, then it's probably time to change it. Do something or think about something that's going to make you feel better, uplifted, and put something on inspirational, like we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Like Eric says, he says, every morning I call someone cool each day. Like Mondays, John Gray. Tuesdays is Laura Langmeyer. Wednesdays is Les Brown. Thursdays, Bob Proctor. Fridays is Greg Reed. Yeah. So you can call somebody, you can listen to somebody, whatever is going to help you. And you're going to find that the more you practice this, it gets easier. And then you're going to look back of, wow, when this type of situation used to show up before, I used to handle it this way, or I used to be in this mode for X amount of time. And then you're going to realize and see the improvement that you've made within yourself of, wow, I respond to this so much better.
Yeah.
I when I'm in this mode, I don't stay there very long. I can snap out of it very quickly now.
Yeah.
Before I used to have a hard time. Now it's easier, but you have to practice this and you have to be very mindful. But again, you can practice this as what's your game plan? If this scenario was to happen, what would I do? And you can rehearse that. It's like dress rehearsal. So when a situation happens, Whereas maybe it's a day you're not feeling so good about yourself, or maybe it's you're having an issue with somebody else. What's the best way to go about that? And then when you practice that, you'll go into that new automatic mode and you're going to start to see a different experience.
Yeah. All right. So I think we are at the end of our
We are at
show.
the end. So that was the last point. So thank you guys again for being here on Awaken Your Spirit. Remember, we're live here every Mondays and Wednesdays on Facebook and YouTube at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern. If you guys would like to join us here each time on the show, make sure if you're watching on Facebook to turn on the notification reminder here in the feed. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click that little bell icon so you know each time we have a new video posted.
All right. So thank you for joining us.
And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.